Chapter 2, on Vanishing. I have officiated only one memorial service in which I thought the dead person might come back. Dorothy was 103, and she was known for surprise reappearances. Dorothy had resided in an independent living apartment at the retirement community, and I had visited her on the few occasions when she had come to the gardens to recover from an illness. I had learned over the course of these visits that as a teenager, she had left home to become a stage assistant to Harry Houdini, against her parents' wishes, of course. What did a nice Methodist girl, a preacher's daughter, want with an older man, a vaudeville magician no less, rumored to be a Jew, the son of a rabbi? Only after Houdini and his wife Bess visited Dorothy's parents and promised to care for her as their own daughter did her parents relent. In Houdini's shows, Dorothy would pop out from the top of an oversized radio that Houdini had just shown the audience to be empty, kicking up one leg and then the other in Rockette-style fashion. Grabbing her at the waist, Houdini would lower her to the floor where she would dance the Charleston. In another act, she was tied, bound, feet to neck, to a pole. A curtain would fall to the floor, and voila, she would reappear as a ballerina with butterfly wings, fluttering across the stage. At the end of each night's performance, Dorothy stood just off stage next to Bess to witness Houdini's finale, the Chinese water torture cell. A shackled Houdini was lowered upside down into a tank of water from which he escaped 2 minutes later. Dorothy knew how to accomplish this stunt, what was often deemed his greatest escape, but she never broke confidence. Dorothy was the last surviving member of Houdini's show. Long after his death, she attended seances on Halloween, awaiting communication with the great Houdini, which apparently was never forthcoming. 85 years after Houdini's death, now she too had died. Each time I had visited her, I had felt her end was imminent. Already a petite woman, she seemed to grow smaller and smaller until I was sure I would find her one day simply gone. But somehow she persisted until she died about 3 years into my tenure. As I prepared for her memorial, I imagined her doing one of her famous acts at the service. Instead of an oversized radio, her legs would kick open and emerge up one, up two from a once closed coffin, back to do the Charleston one last time, or breaking free from the chains of death. She would pirouette through the parlor in her butterfly wings. Instead, her son, who was in his 80s and also lived at the retirement community, opted for a casketless memorial service rather than a traditional funeral. And this somewhat allayed my anxieties about the coffin popping open. While a reappearance out of thin air seemed less likely, I knew by then that anything was possible with her. Dorothy went to her grave without ever having revealed Houdini's secrets. True to the vow she took at 17, I wonder what it is like to hold the keys to illusion, to know how to unbind oneself, to learn the mechanisms of vanishing, to feel the weight of magic's wisdom. Had she not been so scrupulously loyal, perhaps she could have helped the rest of us solve the riddle of how to vanish well. I came of age in the 1990s when terms like the right to die, persistent vegetative state, and advance directive infused the public discourse, and debates raged over euthanasia. In grade school, I became vaguely aware of Nancy Cruzon, a resident of my home state of Missouri, and Terry Chavo, women who could not articulate their end-of-life wishes, whose bodies became the site of fierce political contestation. Dr. Jack Kevorkian was solidly a household name. In defiance of the law, he had helped dozens of seriously ill patients end their lives. His visage saturated the media, even appearing on a 1993 cover of Time with the title Dr. Death and the question, is he an angel of mercy or a murderer? It was only recently, however, that I learned of Kevorkian's first client, a 55-year-old English teacher from Portland named Janet Atkins. Diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease, she could and did articulate her wishes and decided to make herself gone before the disease got the chance. At a press conference shortly after his wife's death, Ron Atkins read from Janet's suicide note. I have decided, for the following reasons, to take my own life. This is a decision taken in a normal state of mind and is fully considered. I have Alzheimer's disease and do not want to let it progress any further. I do not want to put my family or myself through the agony of this terrible disease. 1 week after beating her sons at tennis, according to reports, she lay supine in the back of Kevorkian's 1968 Volkswagen van in a parking lot in a Detroit suburb, in her arm an IV hooked to the pathologist's own invention, the Thanatron, which delivered heart-stopping potassium chloride into her bloodstream. Janet Atkins sympathizers pointed to the horrific prospect of this dementing disease pathology and her calculated courage. While she could still act on her own behalf in what she had called in her note a normal state of mind, Janet Atkins headed off what she imagined as agony for her future self and her family. A pianist, Janet Atkins feared losing music, reportedly telling her pastor, I can't remember my music. I can't remember the scores, and I begin to see the beginning of the deterioration, and I don't want to go through with that deterioration. Perhaps the scores might degenerate into strung out smudges of black, and she might find notes tangled, unable to fight themselves free to make melody. Perhaps her deterioration would be depleting in every way. It would be saturated with sorrow. It would require heroic fortitude. Perhaps her family would be drained in Sisyphean service to a Janet Atkins unable to even thank them. I imagine Janet Atkins wished to spare her loved ones the torment of her slow self-disappearance. In the days leading up to Dorothy's service, I read the tributes to her that appeared in major newspapers. I learned that she was the last of 200 women to audition for Houdini's show and had instantly dazzled the illusionist. After her contract with Houdini had ended, she went on to create a Latin dance called the Rumbalero and to appear in several movies, including Flying Down to Rio with Fred Astaire. In her later years, she donated $12.5 million to build an art center. Reading these tributes prompted me to consider the story of my grandfather Jack, whose life, while not as glamorous as Houdini's assistant, had seemed remarkable to me in its own right. A World War II veteran, Jack received the Distinguished Flying Cross for rescuing a fellow pilot by making a tricky, unauthorized landing in the Himalayas. Upon His return from the war, Jack had considered becoming a band teacher, but instead pursued a career in medicine. He played jazz trombone in dive bars at night to pay for medical school. Jack was a committed and smart country doctor. He made house calls and forgave patients' debts. He delivered babies and aided the dying. In the days before defibrillators, Jack once frayed a lamp cord, plugged it in, and shocked a patient to revive him. In retirement, he owned and helped to operate a local pharmacy. Jack was an avid hobbyist, always working in his woodshed or on his computer or on perfecting his omelets. He traveled the world as an ambassador with Rotary International. He maintained his passion for music, singing solos at church, playing the electric organ for his grandkids, and leading songs at Rotary meetings well into his 80s. The Jack of all these activities, and the Jack who had the ability to narrate them and their importance to him, steadily vanished in his final years. On his 80th birthday, 11 and a half years before his death, he could not keep score in a simple dice game we played. This singular memory helps me to date the duration of his dementia. At the time of Dorothy's death, Jack was living in an assisted living facility that specialized in memory care. Jack would soon thereafter move to a nursing home where he lived his last 2 years. If not in bed, he was in his wheelchair at a table with other old war veterans in wheelchairs. He said very few words. When I told a minister friend about my grandfather's move to the nursing home, she reflexively responded, "Oh, so he's gone." Her words reminded me of another friend who told me that she promised her father that if he ever gets dementia, not to worry, she will take him on a nice walk to the edge of a cliff. She then made a quick pushing motion, gone. It seems persons with dementia are more subject to being pronounced gone, to being pushed off the proverbial cliff, than persons with other kinds of progressive illnesses. While my grandfather's life in many respects had shrunk, he certainly was not gone to those who knew and loved him. But I felt the push toward his erasure, and I wanted to know who or what was doing the pushing. A couple of weeks after Dorothy's memorial service, I attended a workshop on spirituality and dementia, where I first learned of the late British social psychologist Tom Kitwood, who in the 1980s and 90s had developed a new model for providing care to persons with dementia, challenging the old culture of care that viewed dementia patients as problems to be managed, as bodies in need of physical care, and little else. Kitwood argued that people with dementia should be engaged with as complex individuals living within a complex social environment. From what I gleaned at the workshop, I sensed that his approach to dementia might help me better understand what contributes to the invisibility of persons with dementia. In the coming months, I read his seminal work, whose title alone attracted me: Dementia Reconsidered. The person comes first. It seemed telling that a reconsideration of dementia would entail something as seemingly obvious as centering the person, as giving persons preeminence in their own lives. Most of the research on dementia had ignored the impact of the social environment on people with dementia and on their disease process. Kitwood offered a profound corrective. He observed the ubiquity of what he called malignant social psychology. In relation to persons with dementia, through close observation of daily interactions between caregivers and dementia patients, Kitwood identified 17 malignant elements that promote the depersonalization of persons with dementia: treachery, disempowerment, infantilization, intimidation, labeling, stigmatization, outpacing, invalidation, banishment, objectification, ignoring, imposition, withholding accusations, disruption, mockery, disparagement. Kitwood argued that care settings shaped by malignant social psychology can actually accelerate neurological decline. He critiqued the standard paradigm of dementia, which, in his view, often blamed only the organic progression of dementia for the decline that sufferers experience. The silent stigmatization partner in this dynamic, that is, the cultural bigotry against both cognitive impairment and old age, gets off scot-free. The process of dementia, according to Kitwood, involves a continuing interplay between those factors that pertain to neuropathology per se and those which are social psychological. Herein lies the frightening and hopeful prospect. The person with dementia does not simply disappear on her own. It's not just a matter of the private malfunctioning of her private brain. It has to do with our malfunctioning, our diseased public mind. Not long after I read Kitwood, I walked into the program room and found Ruth yelling and pounding her fists on the table. She had recently moved to the dementia unit where I had met her a few days before during my rounds. At that time, Ruth had been unhappy about her move, but not distraught like she was now. Seeing my shock, an activity staff member explained, "She's been terrible to us, yelling out bad things at everyone who walks by. She said she was hungry, that she wanted lunch, but she just ate lunch. So I got her pudding for a snack and she threw the pudding at me and it splattered all over the floor. Then she called me a bad name. I'm done. I'm just done." She turned back to Ruth and walked away. Understanding Kitwood's malignant social psychology helped me unpack this brief encounter. There was infantilization. Ruth was not permitted the food of her choice because she just ate lunch. There was ignoring the objectification. The staff member talked over and about the resident as if she were not there, as if she were a non-entity. There was imposition, overriding Ruth's stated desire. The worker insisted she must have a snack instead of a meal. There was disparagement. The staff member was clearly angry with Ruth, blaming her for her bad mood. There was withholding and banishment. The staff member left Ruth declaring, "I'm just done." Ruth was just left alone. Malignancy now hemmed her in. I watched a dining room staff member approach Ruth. "What would you like?" he asked. "A sandwich or something," she replied. He returned from the kitchen with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Ruth immediately bit into it. "Thank you. I never thought I'd be this happy with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich," she said. By this relatively simple act, the staff member had unraveled a bit of the malignancy, but the task of undoing malignant social psychology cannot rest only on direct caregivers. Kitwood understood malignant social psychology as in the air, part of our cultural inheritance, not a phenomenon to be blamed on or solely remediated by individual caregivers. Malignant responses to dementia in Kitwood analysis reveal tragic inadequacies in our culture, economy, and medical system, which often define a person's worth in terms of financial, physical, and intellectual power. That certain mental powers determine one's moral standing reflects what the bioethicist Stephen Post calls our culture's hypercognitive values, a phrase he first used in his 1995 book, The Moral Challenge of Alzheimer's Disease. Revisiting the concept in a 2011 article, Post highlights the troubling tendency in our hyper-cognitive culture to exclude human beings from moral concern while they are still among the living. Our particular veneration of cognitive acumen generates dementism, a term Post uses to describe the prejudice against the deeply forgetful. Transcending the acts and intentions of discrete individuals, systemic dementism exists in structures that overlook, minimize, or actively undermine the needs of persons with dementia. For example, assisted living facilities in which approximately 7 out of 10 residents have some degree of cognitive impairment are underregulated, leaving people with dementia particularly vulnerable. A severe shortage in the United States of geriatricians, who are often best equipped to provide ongoing clinical support for older persons with dementia, signals a prejudice in the medical system. The overuse of psychotropic drugs, which carry risky side effects for elders with dementia, is another sign of dementism. Unlike the medicines used to treat the cognitive symptoms of dementia, these psychotropic drugs, which include antidepressants, antipsychotics, anxiolytics for anxiety, and anti-seizure medications, are used to manage certain behaviors associated with dementia and are not approved by the FDA. For this specific use, antipsychotic medications are particularly hazardous for older adults with dementia, greatly increasing the likelihood of stroke and death. A study published in 2016 in International Psychogeriatrics revealed that only 10% of psychotropic use among people with dementia is fully appropriate. And yet pharmaceutical companies have pushed the use of such medications for persons with dementia. In 2013, Johnson & Johnson paid a $2.2 billion settlement for the improper promotion of Risperdal, a drug designed to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder for use with dementia patients, despite the company's knowledge of its serious health risks for this population. As I consider religious institutions within my own Protestant circles, I notice how rarely seminaries offer much, if any, training to future pastors about aging and dementia. Churches often pump tremendous resources into ministries for young families and children with little attention to elders, let alone elders with dementia. Progressive churches like mine, which faithfully fight for racial, gender, and economic justice, often fail to take into account ageism and the plight of people with cognitive impairment. Redressing malignant social psychology is not as easy as serving peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Remediation is needed at every level.